So today's topic is all about why we need to balance our minds if we want to balance the books. And I wanted to just kick off with that why question, really, why it's important if we do that. And obviously I know that instinctively and common sense tells me that's important, but I know that certainly over the last few weeks, I've made some decisions that whilst they felt really important for my business, they probably weren't the smartest moves I could have made in terms of my mental health. So, and yet here I am. So why is it important that we do that?
Yeah, it's an interesting time to be talking about this, because I think it's much more front of mind than it has been for a lot of people. I think this idea of looking after our minds, our mental health, it often gets pushed to the side, but there's a lot more talk about it because of all of the things that are happening at the moment. And so on one hand, it's sort of pushing at an open door. I don't feel like we need to kind of give people a big lecture about why it's important to look after our minds, but it's worth thinking about a couple of things in particular. That one is, we did a bit of polling with the mental health charity Mind a few years ago, and what we found is that about like 83% of people we surveyed all around the country said that they thought their mental health was as important as their physical health. But over 50% had never thought about the health of their minds before. And so it's not so much whether we think it's important, it's whether we prioritize it, whether we put our attention on it. When you say, is this important? People go, oh yeah, of course, my mind, I'll be using that. That's a handy thing to have. But then we do other things become more pressing, more high priority, worries about money, worries about deadlines, time, responsibilities to other people. And so it can almost, sometimes actually people even feel that it's selfish to look after themselves. And so that's why it gets knocked down the list. And so there's definitely a kind of theme, I think, with how much of a priority we make it. And then of course the current situation, we're a lot of the time feeling a bit powerless of what to do with our work and having our movements restricted, and so that we're spending a lot of time on our own or in more isolated ways. So we're going introspective in a way. But it does feel like it's a good moment to talk about why it's really important, because it's part of how we design our response, to think about the kind of sustainability of what we're doing, the way that we can actually design a way through this that nurtures us rather than burns us out. And I think kind of common thread with the charitable sector and the creative industries is that there is a lot of burnout because we care, because there's a lot of passion for what's going on. And so I think one of the main reasons it's really important for people in these professions to take care of their minds is because what happens is that if you've got a great motivation for what you're doing, a great drive for it, what you end up with is often a stress problem, and getting that balance of sustainable engagement, not just feeling passionate about what you're doing, but feeling like you could get up and do the same thing every day, that it's not taking from you. In fact, it might even be giving. It could actually be a very nurturing thing to be doing, a thing that helps your mind. So I think it's that kind of thing. It's fundamental thread running through it that we forget about, but it's really brought it home right now.
It's interesting. You said that idea about something which can tip over and then it can become a negative. I read a great book a few years ago, which was called Depressive Illness, Curse of the Strong, which I think is, I always want to do that when I listen to that, think about that book. It's written by, I think it's a guy called Christopher Anstruther who wrote it. I'll need to check that. But he had this brilliant analogy, which really sort of struck home for me. He had this idea of that you could have a 3-amp plug, but if so the idea that you were talking about was sort of burning out, but if you continue to put a 13-amp fuse into that 3-amp plug, it will run for a while and then it will just blow again. And then if you put the same fuse back in, the just same thing is going to happen. And that really struck me, because it's that idea that you can keep going and then you stop for a bit and you go, oh, I'm better now. And then you just carry on the same way, and the same thing happens. I thought that was quite an interesting sort of way to think about it. You've got a certain amount of energy.
And energy management is a big part of it. And I think another reason why it's important is that it's fundamental to productivity, and particularly in the kind of the industries we're talking about. I mean, we're using our minds. Knowledge economy generally has this phenomenon that it's not enough to just be present physically at work. You need to be present mentally at work, and actually managing our minds is a part of being able to get stuff done. The World Health Organization includes in its definition of mental health being productive, and making contribution to other people. So it's not a purely self-involved thing of trying to just feel good. It's also about applying your mind effectively to what you're trying to get done, which I think in that context, suddenly it clicks into place as though this is a more fundamental thing than I think I often think of it as being. And to sum it up in a real nutshell, the big shift that's happened for how I work over the last decade of doing this research and work and working with people is that I used to think my responsibility to my customers, to my board, to my staff was to work longer hours, to do more, and now I think it's my responsibility to show up for everything that I'm doing in the best possible mental state to do it as well as I can. And so the time I spend resting and looking after myself is prep time for being better at my job, and it feels like I can justify the time a bit better.
That is a great tip. That is brilliant. The idea of like the time that you spend on yourself being preparation time. I'm going to try, and that's the one that every time I speak to Andy, he comes up with a little nugget, just throws it in casually. And I'm like, wow, that is amazing.
You should do t-shirts, really.
Exactly. Yeah. You talked a little bit about the productivity and things like that. And I know that one of the things that I've been struggling with recently is that like COVID-19 productivity levels are totally different to, normal productivity levels. And I wondered if you could spend a little bit of time on the kind of brain science stuff, what's going on in our minds at the moment, as we try and process all of this. We juggle loads of stuff. We kind of try and keep the big stuff at the back of my mind, some of us. What's going on in our minds? Because you told me last week when we were talking that you should think of your mind as your friend. It's trying to work with you and trying to help you. So what's our friend doing? What's our friendly mind doing at the moment? What's going on for it?
Yeah, it's not always easy to think that your mind is your friend when it's doing mad things, but I guess the idea is that there's a positive intention behind it, and that's one of the themes with all of the stuff that's going on at the moment. I mean, I'd caveat all of this by saying that on the one hand, this is a more communal and collective experience than maybe we've got any example of in our lifetimes. So we can say a bit more generally how people's minds are being affected by this, but it is playing out very differently for different people, different industries, different stages of life. So there are generalizations to be made, but then there's also a lot of variation within that. The kind of broad stroke of it is that about 4 billion people have had their movements restricted over the last few months, which is unbelievable. And there's not any war that's had that kind of global reach. And also even things like a conflict like that, which is the closest analogy we're drawing from, it doesn't cut us off from each other in the same way. It doesn't restrict us interacting with our neighbors in the same way. So that it's a very peculiar thing. And there are some patterns in what's going on. So Wuhan psychologists came and gave a presentation to the American Psychiatric Association a few weeks ago, and they identified 3 phases to the lockdown and the impact it was having on people. The first was fear and anxiety, and I think that's the time we hit that around early March, and there was a big spike in anxiety levels. Then as the lockdown came in, the anxiety starts to dip, and this feeling comes in of us being in it together. And then there's more anger and frustration with either being frustrated at the lockdown or being frustrated with other people for not doing their bit. And then the third phase they observed was a kind of the longer tail of just being depressed about it because the restrictions continued for longer than people expected. And I think that's where we're tipping into now. We've had that rush of what our minds are trying to do is be hypervigilant. And so certainly through March, the general thing that I was observing is everybody panicking about changing their habits quickly, washing their hands, being nervous about going into the office, even though we were still being told to, just being fearful all the time. And it's your mind just watching for threats. And that's really useful. There are threats. It should be doing that, but it can become a bit of a loop. And we might talk about that a bit more in detail in the second session. I think we've got a bit more time for talking about that. But it's certainly then, once we feel like we've got a handle on how to stay safe, it's that grind of doing it. And the bit that I think we've got that's going to be interesting to see, and by interesting I mean awful probably, is that we've actually got to live with it now. We're not done. We're not New Zealand. We haven't managed to stamp it out. What we meant by flattening the curve was to spread out the infection so that people get ill in an orderly fashion. It's a very British way of managing things, just get everybody queue, basically. And so now we've got to come back knowing that the virus is with us and we've got to try and stay safe. So I think we'll probably see anxiety rising a bit again, and particularly as schools open, as people get sent back to work. But the bit I did want to just mention is that, of course, a lot of people have been going to work. So for some people, the challenge has been sitting at home furloughed or having all their projects cancelled, and the worries have been more economic, but they're physically safe. But other people are going out and cleaning the supermarkets and worrying not only about their own health, but their family's health. And this idea of frontline workers kind of bugs me, because soldiers go to the front line, but they don't bring their kids with them. And actually, the frontline workers in this situation are risking their family's health as well. So the anxiety and the pressure on large segments of people are playing out hugely differently. Some of our clients, they're just worried about home working and getting the right chair because their back hurts. Other people are going, I'm an airline pilot. Maybe we don't need those anymore. Maybe I need to retrain as a tennis coach. I don't know what to do with my life. So huge variety within these big, broad strokes.
I think, there's loads in there, isn't there? I mean, one of the things that I think is going to be interesting for people in the creative sector is that, so shops in England reopened on Monday. People are starting to talk about pubs and cafes and restaurants reopening at the beginning of July. And I think that one of the things that, talking about phases, I think one of the things that's going to be interesting for us in the creative sector is that for a lot of people, it will feel like that is near enough normal for them to kind of, maybe their anxiety levels might go down a little bit. I don't know. But for lots of people in the creative sector, that isn't normal. Our venues aren't going to reopen probably until, certainly in the performing arts, until early next year. And so I just wonder how that's going to play out, with us. Everybody has a very different experience of lockdown, don't they? But there's a huge swathe of the population for whom life isn't going to look anything like normal until.
And there's been probably more focus in the press on retail, on pubs, on hospitality, on travel, these sort of big ticket items which employ lots of people in quite a linear and regulated fashion, but less talk about the creative industries. And that for me feels like as urgent, or potentially even more, big impact on it. So we do need to get the conversation more about that, about what to do, particularly for venues. And I'm a trustee of Conway Hall, and we're trying to figure out how to do everything online, and as lots of people are, it's a very tricky situation to look at what normal looks like. But I think as well, we were talking last week about the creative industries generally, and kind of the vulnerability within the sector for mental ill health, and the kind of high instances of depression, anxiety particularly. So what do you think that's part of this? I mean, that predates COVID, of course, but how do you see this playing out for the sector?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Well, I was thinking back to the starting point for putting this project together, and there was some background research. I think I probably came across that afterwards. What it was really based on was my experience of having run my own business for nearly 20 years, and just my own experiences of, we were talking about earlier of I feel like I've got all the badges and all the scars that come with having done that for 20 years, all the highs and lows. And the more I talk to my peers and to, people that I work with every week, it just felt to me that there was like a sort of, the issue was really important. The mental health was a really big issue. Well, sure enough, when I started to dig around, lots of research. So there was some research in 2018 that said that even though in sort of, if 1 in 4 of people on average suffer some kind of mental health issue, in the creative sector, we're 3 times as likely as that to experience that. And when you think about it, that's hardly surprising. We've got really high levels of insecurity. We work really long hours. The hours are irregular. For good or bad, there's often a blurry line between what we do socially and what we do work-wise. Certainly for lots of people I know, what they do is massively bound up in who they are as well. So the value that work has for you is really important. That Inspire research, one thing that was interesting, and again, I think we all know this, is it said that this was in 2018. I mean, I don't know what it would be now, but 20% of people in the creative sector are paid at a level which is under the poverty line.
Yeah.
and so that insecurity, you talk about financial insecurity, but when you read something like that, you think, well, that's, that's obviously a really big issue. But I think that for me, I think the fact that we're going to be going through this for a long time feels really, really important to me, because we get that you talked about, the frustration, the anger, the anxiety. It feels like, in a year's time, we might only just be coming out of that. And that's a long time to be thinking about that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the consequences of that, the below the poverty line working, which is a kind of such a trait of creative industries. And I'd say it's not unique to it. It's also, it's a problem with the caring profession. Social care has exactly this problem as well. But a lot of it is professions where people do it for the passion, which means that people will do it even though they're not making enough money, because it's their identity, it's who they are, and it kind of lets people off the hook rewarding them properly. And it's one of the reasons I think that the creative industries aren't getting as much attention, because it's like, well, our artists are struggling. Well, like, they always struggle, don't they? Nothing new there. But airline pilots struggling, that we've got to do something about. So it's about expectations as well. The aspiration we should have that people who do things that add value to society should be paid well, rather than just seeing that as a sort of reward in itself, is quite an important statement we need to keep making for the industry. But it's interesting. I would say that one of the things with Mindapples over the years is that the two groups that have most quickly resonated with it and supported it in the early days, just going around asking people what they do that's good for their mind and talking about mental health as a part of life, have been people with experiences of ill health and people in the creative industries. And I think my theory about why is because I think all of those people seemed to recognize that their mind can change, and that's part of lived experience, and it's not this sort of fixed thing. I think for some people I talk to about Mindapples, they're fearful of the idea that they would even change their mind at all. It's like, my mind is fixed, it's always been the same, and it will never change, and please stop trying to change my mind. Whereas other people see it as an interesting journey and go, oh, right, maybe I could be a different person for a year and see whether that improves my practice. So I think there's an openness which is helpful as well.
I think that's interesting. I talk a lot about the idea that curiosity and fear can be two sides of the same coin. So you can wake up one morning and think, oh, I don't know how to do that. Oh, no, I don't know how to do that. And you get quite scared of that. And another morning you could wake up with exactly the same issue and go, oh, that's interesting. I don't really understand that. I don't know how that works. And you can be curious about it. And so just, not necessarily deciding, but just trying to remember that there's a curious approach. There's an approach which involves inquiry and finding out and discovery. Yeah. It feels like a useful sort of, I use that quite a lot. I try and, whenever I think I'm scared of something or I'm worrying about it, I try and turn it into a curiosity question.
Yeah, we might talk about that. I think we've got a session, we'll talk about creativity and under pressure, which is quite important. But the story that it reminds me of with that, what you're saying there, is that many years ago, when we were trying to document more of what we do on the campaign side, we have a Mindapples tree, and we asked people to fill their Mindapples and hang it up as an installation we were taking to festivals and conferences. But I wanted we did a pop-up in Brixton Market, where we were going to put a tree in Brixton Market and ask people locally what they do that's good for their mind. And I felt very out of my depth. And like 2 or 3 days before, I just suddenly felt like, this is going to be a disaster. We aren't ready. Everyone's going to hate it. Oh, this is an awful, why have I dedicated my life to this stupid thing? What a ridiculous idea. What is a Mindapple anyway? I'm an idiot. And so my response to that was, I decided to hire a camera crew to film the event, because why not? Let's see, let's go down in flames. And it went fine. So, and we got it documented, but it's exactly that of like, oh, let's just make this even more insane. Okay, let's see what happens.
I'm so glad that you have those fears before events. I just think it's such a, I think you were talking earlier about building in kind of rest and recovery into your preparation plans. I think I've learned over the years to build in a moment where I just have a panic and just get it out of the way, get it done, and then move on. One of the things I'm interested in is whether there's anything about people that work in the creative industries, particularly people who are doing it under their own steam. I started the hub because I couldn't find anyone to give me the job that I wanted. It just didn't seem to be out there. And I meet lots of people who are very clear in their, well, not necessarily clear in their focus, but they have a really clear vision for what they want to do, and a clear sense of identity. And I wondered if there's anything that you've come across in all the work you've done at Mindapples that where there's something about the creative sector. We've got, like, I don't know if there are any like superpowers that come with being somebody who is creative. That, you know, in mental health terms, do we have any special characteristics that we can use?
I mean, of course, again, it is different for different people. I think different personality traits respond in different ways. So I've got friends who are very introverted and creative, and they're loving lockdown because they get more writing done, or they're back in the studio, and others who are missing festival crew or performing. You know, so it is, we're within that, the industry, there's people who are good at different bits of it. But I mean, I think one thing, that I sense of identity, in the psychology of it, we call it internalization, of how, whether you can take external objectives and make them part of your identity, part of what you're passionate about. And I think the ability to look at a situation and find something in it that feels like your thing, that you can do, that you can make your own, is a really valuable skill. And I think a lot of people in other industries struggle with that. They have tasks to do and they can't really see themselves in them. They just have to do them. And so there's a sort of, the challenge for them is the grind, is that, you know, they have to focus on, I'm doing this for my kids, I'm doing this for, you know, to get the new house or something. Whereas to be able to find a way of enjoying what you're doing right now is an incredibly useful and underrated skill, I think. And I saw a few comments in the chat about sort of finding happiness now rather than later, and we might talk a bit about that when we talk about motivation and happiness. We'll dive into that in a future session. But we're quite bad at predicting what makes us happy and thinking, if I get this, then I'll be happy. And then you get it and you think, oh, I'm not happy. And I think Dorothy Parker put it, the trouble with trying to get there is that when you get there, you realize there's no there. And I think the creative industries, I would say that there are people who perhaps have gone there and gone, oh, this is empty, and then tried to live with the emptiness and try to understand that and see it as an opportunity to create things into the space rather than a feeling of something needs to fill me up. So I think that self-determination, that self-sustaining quality is exactly what we need right now. And it might lead to amazing creative things coming out of this. Not to say that it isn't hard, but it certainly feels like there's possibilities of something really wonderful coming out of it all.
Yeah, it's interesting, that idea of things almost being hidden in plain sight, isn't it? You see them, there are lots of things that you take for granted. You know, one of the things that I've been doing recently is that everybody knows this one about, you know, writing down three things that you're really grateful for, three things that went really well, and three best things that happened today. Because I think it's so easy to get into that kind of mindset of like, oh God, right, okay, which day is it? Is it Tuesday? Is it Wednesday? Oh, every day's the same. But, you know, and so I've certainly been trying to do that, kind of look at the things that are hidden in plain sight. Conversely, is there anything on the downside? So if those things, you know, if that sense of identity and self-purpose, I imagine it's like most things, that it's a case of moderation. If you press that purpose thing too hard, that's when you get into kind of burnout territory and things like that. But are there things that sometimes we're a bit more prone to, that people who work in that way are a bit more prone to experiencing?
Yeah, I mean, people are creative in different ways. So some people are very driven by, you know, shadows and the darkness, and to try and solve problems or wrestling with stuff that they're stuck with. And other people they create better when they're feeling calm and rested and in a good place. So I think it can vary a bit. But I think one of the big problems with associating your identity with your work is that, of course, your work is not necessarily in your control. And so if what you're drawing your identity or your strength from it depends on people, you know, coming and listening to things, or funding your work, or being interested in some way, it does extend that the locus of control out. You need more things to line up. And so when it's what a friend of mine described as getting on the rocket. So you're talking more in an entrepreneurial context than in a creative industries way. But when you launch a new venture or business, you can get on the rocket, and then you can feel the exhilaration of it getting higher and higher. And then as it starts to stall and you start to see it dropping, you're on the rocket and it's horrible and you fall. But you can also stay on the ground and launch the rocket and just enjoy watching it. And then you can stay safe on the ground knowing that you've made a nice thing. And that mental flip is quite important, of knowing that a project can fail, but it doesn't mean that you have failed. It means that you've tried a thing and it was interesting and you've learned something. So I think that tendency of, I've got on the rocket, here I am going higher again. Oh no, I'm really high. Is the problem.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring you mentioned earlier that you'd done the survey a while ago, which talked about the number of people that thought that their mental health was as important as their physical health. So we did a survey with the Creative Industries Federation that was open for about 3 weeks. It's just closing this week, and we asked people a whole series of questions, and we included that one in there. So I shamelessly stole that question from you, Andy, and hope that's okay. Asking it afterwards. And you'll be pleased to know that everyone, pretty much like 99%, said that having good mental health is just as important as physical health. So maybe it's interesting what you said. Maybe we've all gone on a bit of a journey around that recently. But at the same time, far fewer people said that they regularly do something that they know is good for their mental health. And so I'm interested in that. That I sort of mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, but the idea that we all know that this is really important, but yet somehow we just don't make the changes that we know we should do. And I wonder why we don't do that. I mean, I would love to know why I don't do all the things that I know would be sensible. So what's, without making this all about me, because we can chat about me later, but what is it generally? What stops people from doing the stuff that we know is sensible?
Yeah, a friend of mine said that she'd realised that saying I don't have enough time is no longer an excuse she can ever use again in her life, because she's had enough time and she hasn't done any of the things that she was planning to do. And so it reveals that actually there are other barriers to it. I think some of it's urgency, that there's lots of things that we know would be good, we have passion for, we think they're important, but because there's no external incentive, there's no one waiting for it, chasing us for it, we prioritize the things that other people need, or that we're getting the money in, we're getting people off our back, we're responding to emails. So some of it is, this is why coaches talk about goal setting. So actually trying to create your own incentives, your own focus, so that you're not just leaving it to the world around you to say, what you should be prioritizing, what you should be doing, and so making that a kind of a part of how you prioritize your time, rather than just leaving that to chance, seems to be very important. And I think people often think it's selfish. I mean, I think that the times when we have the best conversations with people about looking after their minds and their well-being, maybe we can talk about this in a minute, of what we each do that we think is good for our minds, is that I think it's if you put it in the context of what do you do to feel good or be happy, the answer is often things that I would do, but I've got to homeschool the kids, or I've got to try and get some money in, pay the mortgage. Whereas if you talk about it in terms of what helps to get things done, what do you do to be able to achieve your goals, whatever those may be, whether you want to be happy, whether you want to be a better parent, make more money, make beautiful art, you're using your mind to do it. And so actually thinking about what helps your mind be in the best state to do those things you care about, just latch it on to something that you already have momentum to do, and then that feels a little bit easier to see it as part of that goal seeking work, rather than just being a luxury that you do after the to-do list is finished, which I think is where it often gets positioned as a thing that you do later once you've finished everything else. So I'll have a bit of well-being time, well-being is sort of knocked off to the side, but actually it's, your mind is your greatest asset, you use it for everything that you do. And so actually this should be fundamental. The analogy we use a lot, we used to use it as a quote from Abraham Lincoln, which is how it was told to me. It's not Abraham Lincoln, it's from an Axe advertisement from 1960, but it's good to pretend it's from Abraham Lincoln. But the old story is, if I had 5 minutes to chop down a tree, I would spend 3 of them sharpening the axe. And I think we don't necessarily think of spending the time to kind of sharpen ourselves up to be able to get work done. We sharpen later when we finished hacking away at it with a blunt axe, and that seems to help, I think, with prioritizing.
Yeah, I think there's something also for me that it took me a while to figure out, there I was kind of busy setting goals for my business. And I don't think, I was certainly a good few years into running it before I realized that actually I could have goals for myself as well. And those goals, the fact that the goals for my life needed to fit into the goals for my business. And so it just hadn't occurred to me to almost apply the same level of kind of rigor, if you like, or reflection to my life as it did to, I had a business plan that, I reviewed every year, but I didn't really stop and think about, the life plan or anything like that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I think something that's, that could be useful.
I can offer a good tip on that. So I had a coach years ago who said that if my business depended on me, then I was the key asset, and I needed to think of myself in those terms rather than seeing myself as a thing that the business will draw from and suck dry. Actually, I'm an asset to be developed. And so I recommend putting yourself on your asset register and thinking about depreciation and have you got more valuable or less valuable over the last year.
That's a great idea. It's a great idea. Yeah, it's a bit like I used to have the idea of this energy box, and I was constantly sort of raiding the emergency energy box. So similar sort of thing. I wanted to ask specifically about Mindapples.
Yeah.
So you have brought out a couple of really good books, which I have got here, which I'm just going to wave around. Very well thumbed.
Nicely done.
Look at this, bookmarks and everything like that. I would definitely recommend Andy's 2 books, and there are some really brilliant tips in there, like really just basic things like drinking enough water.
That's the main one everyone takes. I've written 2 books about how the mind works, and everyone just says, I'm drinking more water now. I could have written a really short book.
There you go. Look, I've paid attention. I have my water here. Yeah. But I wanted to talk about Mindapples because one of the reasons I was so pleased to work with you on this is that I just think the concept of Mindapples is so brilliant and so simple. So for people that don't know it, I wonder, could you just take us through what it is, what the basics of it are?
Yes, definitely, I can do that. The one thing I did want to say as an aside, though, is that I did find a very odd thing out at the weekend, which is the Mind Manual, which is one of the books you've got there. Someone sent me a link on Twitter that was just positioned on a table in a shot in Artemis Fowl, the new Disney Plus movie. So it's on Disney Plus. I don't know why. It must have been one of the art department's books. We need some books to make this person look like a psychologist, so they threw that down. So we're famous.
Brilliant.
In a terrible film, apparently.
Disney.
So that's a shame. But yeah, so the Mindapples thing, that was the first thing we did right back at the start, was that I was running a tech startup, trying to ask people what they could teach and offer it as a skill to people around them. And I wanted to do something around mental health, but because I wasn't coming at this as a doctor or a psychologist at the time, I was more interested in asking people what worked for them. So the initial seed from which Mindapples grew was asking people, what's the 5 a day for your mind? What 5 things do you do that you think are good for your mind? And we continue to ask that. And so we've been doing work with schools and universities, asking all of the students and pupils what they think is good. We've done a lot of pop-ups and festivals and things like that. And that's what the Apple cards are for, but you can also do it online as well, but it's however you want to do it. So one of the interesting things that people often do is they draw on the cards or make videos or just try and create something to explain what they think is good for their mind, because it's not about trying to find a right answer. It's about the diversity. It's about the divergence. That's the interesting bit. And so over the years, we've asked in all kinds of different settings. And I guess one of the key things with it is people know what works for them. We know our minds, and we're So the idea with Mindapples is to ask people what works for them and to actually be interested and listen to it, and to generally ask it of everyone. And so a really good example of something, we were at the Thames Festival a few years ago, and out by the banks of the river by Tower Bridge, and so a woman came up and asked if she could if she could have a pen, and I said, yeah, you can have a pen, but it would be nice if you did the thing that we're doing, so maybe fill in an apple as well. So she grudgingly started trying to write what she did for her mind. And her son was with her who had a learning disability, and I gave him an apple and asked if he'd like to do it. And she said, no, he's special. He won't be able to do that. But he seemed interested and wanted one, so I gave it to him. And what I watched then was him writing down 5 things very quickly that he felt were really good for his mind, and she really struggled, and he had to help her fill in her mind apple, because a lot of the time whether we've taken the time to think about it. So people in caring professions or looking after other people don't think about it. So a lot of the exercise is just taking a moment and thinking for yourself. And I've met a lot of people who are very keen to help other people's minds, but actually have no idea what they do for their own. And it's good to start with ourselves. So I should ask you, Julia, what do you do that's good for your mind?
Well, it's interesting. So Andy asked me to think about this, and what was interesting for me was the list that I came up with now. I'm interested whether people's list changed, because I looked at my list. So on my list would be baking cakes, and at this point I'm just going to it's a little sneak preview of something that we're going to use later. Here is a little cake that I baked for today with a little hub badge on it. I don't know if you can see that, but anyway, we'll come back to the cake. So baking is top of my list.
That's
Andy's got his little hub badge there. So baking would definitely be at the top of my list. And in my head, I have a course that I haven't yet invented, which is called Baking Your Mind Up. So I'll talk to you about that one, Andy. I know you're not a baker, but I reckon something going on there.
I appreciate the Bucks Fizz reference, though.
Staring at the sea, really big one for me. I find that really helpful. Gardening, scribbling, do a lot of scribbling, and then some basic cutting and sticking. And I think they were, I'm pretty sure they were on my list back in 2013 when I first did this with you.
It's interesting to think whether they stay the same or whether they change. There's certainly perennials, things that last the whole time. And I ambushed Alistair Campbell once. We did an event with him back in last year, and I got him to share his Mindapples, and then I produced the thing that he'd written out when I met him in 2009 and asked him the same question, and we compared what had changed, and most of it was actually the same. The only thing he hadn't mentioned this time was Burnley FC. He forgot that one, but mostly the same. So, but yeah, it's interesting. I think maybe there are things that you've always gone back to, and maybe there are things that particularly you need at certain times, things you're doing now that you weren't doing before, things you wish you did more of. But it's not about the shoulds, it's about observing what you do, not thinking, I wish I'd done more of that, but like, what actually do I do? When I really aspire to do yoga, what do I do instead? And so, I'd love to put yoga on my Apple Card, but no, it's Animal Crossing. Sorry, I'm rubbish. It's fine. That's all right.
Yeah. So with that in mind, I mean, we don't have any Mindapples apples. We don't have the cards with us. I don't quite know how we do that on Zoom, but there you go. I wonder, would it be useful to get people to just think about that? Maybe spend a couple of minutes just thinking about or a minute or two, thinking about what their 5 are, sharing it in chat. I'm thinking that what we could do is, we took a lot of hub events that we do. We try to crowdsource sort of manifestos, tips and things like that. And I think what could be great is if we were able to get people in chat to talk about their 5 a day, then hopefully, we might find other people who've come up with something that we would find inspiring and think, oh yeah, I might add that to my list.
Yes,
so
it's that
would
curiosity
that work? Could
thing.
we do that?
Yeah, I mean, the part of the reason we ask people is because I never wanted to set myself up as having all the answers, and actually, I'm on this. We're going to use the journey word again. It's a wellbeing event, of course. We have to say journey, but yeah, it's like I need all the help I can get. I've been trying to figure this out. I haven't cracked it yet. So, what do you think works for you? We've had a few suggestions already on the chat of books and apps and things, but even just sharing one thing that you do that's good for your mind on the chat would be great. We can see all the kind of things.
I'd love to see that. So I don't know if people are up for doing that, just sharing, just spend a little bit of time thinking about what your 5 a day might be.
Yeah.
Maybe scribble it down.
We've already got Queer Eye. That's good. Okay.
Roller skating in the park.
Very
Great
good.
idea.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, we've had lots of suggestions over the years of, some there's kind of groupings of walking in nature and yoga and things like that, but there's also the kind of the odd things. Someone said touching my books once. That was the thing that was good for them.
Lovely.
And
playing with Legos in there on this one.
Very good.
Yeah.
Crochet.
Anyone going to put kitchen discos in, I wonder?
Yes, kitchen discos.
Yeah, kitchen discos, quite good for getting rid of some of that energy. Yeah, look, Mitch has mentioned kitchen discos.
Very good.
Maybe we should have a Zoom kitchen disco one day.
Definitely. I mean, there's been a fair bit of talk already about going outside and nature. It's worth just saying that the early days of the lockdown legislation, it was prohibited to go outside for your mental health. And then there was a big campaign and the legislation was changed to permit that, because a lot of people, I was certainly finding I was very anxious and just needed to go outside. But there were people being moved on by the police for sitting on a bench trying to calm their minds down. But that did get changed. That was lobbied successfully. So it's seen as a fundamental part of good health, is to just be able to get a bit of green space, go out into parks, that kind of thing. Lots of things. Yeah, gardening, if you've got a garden. If you
belly dancing.
Something else.
Drinking beer. Great to see beer.
There you go. There's a Norwegian word, utepils, which is a beer enjoyed on the first warm day of the year. So it's there's a lot of...
I've got a foreign word as well, pants drunk.
Pants drunk. Okay.
Pants drunk, which I think is Swedish.
We've all been there.
Yeah, but it means just kind of like, hanging out and just kind of, just, relaxing.
Very
just going
nice.
with things. Pants
Pants
Drunk.
drunk.
There's a
I
book
like it.
which is called Pants Drunk. So if people want to, you mentioned that sometimes people share these on social media. If people wanted to do that just to sort of inspire people, not just on this call, how can people do that?
Yeah,
What's the best way?
send us them on. So we're Mindapples on Twitter and Facebook, so you can share them there, or Mindapple a day on Instagram. And we're not on TikTok yet because I can't face talking about mental health whilst doing a dance, but I'm sure we'll get there. And it would be great, like video clips or drawings, or fill in an apple, or just write them out. Anything like that is great, because a lot of this is about just trying to be a platform to share the things that people are saying work. And for the creative industries, it would be great to get more of a conversation going on for the people who aren't on this call, to get the conversation spread a bit more widely, because it's such an important moment for everyone in the industry to start talking about it. And the answers for people in this sector will be different than another sector. And so it's about trying to find a way of getting more of these insights, these ideas out.
Yeah, I think
And it
that
can be
idea of
fun.
community is really important, isn't it? We can all kind of amplify this conversation and share it with friends, and
Definitely.
encourage people to think about that.
Yeah.
I want to try and open out the questions now. I think there probably have been lots of questions coming in. I tried to keep an eye on chat, but there was quite a lot going on there. Abby, could we ask you to join us again, if that's possible, and take us through some of the questions that have been coming up, or observations?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of chat in the sidebar. It's been really great. I think just very quickly, there's been one direct question. And Julia, you mentioned earlier on a report from 2018. I believe, was it the Inspire report? Can you just clarify?
Yeah, it's an Inspire report. I mean, there were two pieces of research that I looked at that were both from 2018. One was the Inspire report, and that was the one which talked about the fact that people in the creative sector are 3 times as likely to have experienced some kind of mental health issue as the average kind of UK citizen. And the other is a piece of research, and that was the one that also talked about the 20% of people being under the poverty line. The other research was a piece of work that the Arts Council did in 2018, which was more around cultural leadership. And that research talked a lot about how the working culture, the kind of pressure that we put ourselves under, the way that we work, the working practices that we have, mean that incidences of burnout are on the increase. And I think what will be interesting go forward, I mentioned that we've just done this piece of research. Abby, obviously you know about that because you've been party to it, but it might be worth just sharing some of the findings. We're just finishing up the survey, but 81% expected COVID-19 to carry on having an impact on their mental health for the next year. So, and I think, roughly the same people said that number of people said that it had an impact already. So what you were saying, Andy, that idea that this is the long haul for us, and, we need to think about how we can deal with this in the longer term. But also, really shockingly, nearly half of the people that responded to the survey, and it was freelancers and artists, people running their own businesses, just under half of them said that they thought that their turnover was going to decrease by over 50%. So yeah, that's massive. That's huge impact. And around a third were worried that they may not have a business this time next year. So there were other pieces of research, but that research we'll be publishing in the next few weeks. So it would be good for people to keep an eye on that. For that.
There was another question a while ago, and we've kind of been touching on it throughout the session anyway, but I'm interested in the way the economic system is making everyone unhappy and how we might change it, and whether the pandemic can provide any more impetus for this, hoping that artists and creativity might be at the heart of a transformation. And I think also Karen's just put something similar around specific advice for dealing with the limbo of lockdown, that the future of the creative industries is a big unknown.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in, Andy, and then if you want to join in. But just on that first point, the idea that we might want to imagine a different kind of future. I'm on the board of an organisation called the National Campaign for the Arts, and next week we're going to be running an open space event, which is called Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which is specifically looking at, let's not go back to that old normal. Let's look at how we as a sector can invent something that we feel happier with, that maybe feels less unequal, less inaccessible, that sort of thing. So if you I think it might be sold out, but I would suggest that you get yourself on a waiting list if you can, and we'll be publishing the kind of notes from all of that, and we certainly hope that would be the start of a conversation. And I know other organizations are doing that Devoted and Disgruntled, for instance, have been running a whole load of open spaces as well. The other thing, sorry, was about the long haul. And when we were planning this series, certainly in March, I went into rescue mode. It's like, right, I've got to rescue, I've got to try and solve everything, I've got to help everybody. And actually, we then sort of paused and we thought, actually, this is going to be a long road. So that's deliberately why we've scheduled these talks to happen one a month, so that we can respond to what people need as they go through. So hopefully, if you found today interesting and useful, the follow-up sessions in July, August and September will also be useful. So we'll keep people in touch on that. Andy, is there anything you wanted to add?
We've got 5 minutes. Let's destroy capitalism. I mean, why not? No, it's...
Sorry, go on, Andy. There's another question here as well, but I'll let you finish and then ask it.
Okay, well, I mean, just very briefly on capitalism, because I think it's an interesting moment for this. I think the big question really is whether we're going to go back to normal or not. And it feels in the thick of it like everything's permanently changed. But if you think how quickly we managed to flip over to this new way of being, it's also equally possible to flip back. And that's what's happened with previous pandemics. And so I think the problem with capitalism is not so much that capitalism is some kind of awful system imposed upon us. It's that it evolves from human psychology and the desire to achieve goals and to make progress. And a big measure of whether people feel that they're happy or their life is going well is not so much what they have, but whether they feel like they have more than they had last year, or more than their parents did at that age, or more than their neighbors. So that we've got to figure out a way to do something with that need for progress and growth, which comes from within us. And I mean, computer games are interesting for that, because computer games, they're always about achieving goals and making progress. And I'm interested in computer games where there's nothing to do, and what do you do to fill your time. And actually, I think the answer often for what you do when you haven't got any goals to accomplish is creativity. I think that's the thing we do next, is rather than trying to get the bigger house, we try and make something nice. We try and express ourselves. We try and do something interesting, or connect with other people. So I feel like there is an important role the creative industries can play, but we've got to try and figure out how to get out of that mindset of needing to get the next goal, the next progression, the next level up.
How does that link, Andy, to the those happiness indexes? This idea that, because we know, the idea of measuring, we can measure our happiness on an individual level, but is there any link between people doing that individually and society at large measuring?
I think that a lot of this is from studies of what seems to move happiness is not so much wealth, but movements of wealth, whether you feel like you're getting richer rather than whether you are rich. So it's part of Daniel Kahneman's work. One of the things he won the Nobel Prize for was that we don't evaluate the success of our decisions by what we have at the end of them, but by how much we've gained or lost. So if two people have £1 million, but one had nothing yesterday and the other had £2 million yesterday, there'll be very different emotional relationships to that £1 million. And so a lot of it is about trying to figure out how to match well-being to prosperity. A lot of the happiness economic stuff, I think, got into a bit of trouble because they were looking at countries like Bhutan, and it's like people are very happy in Bhutan, but it's not got a great human rights record, and like you really shouldn't necessarily just look at whether people are content. There's other things to look at, but it's in the mix. We've got to figure out what the blend is that's right.
There's 2 more questions that have come through. Would you like them both at once? They're quite different, actually. So I'll give you them both at once, and you can decide how to answer them. So the first one came in a little bit earlier, and it's a question. I think it was from Marja. In our house, there is a very chaotic combination of homeschooling and carving out time to work. So Andy, have you got any advice on time management and how to work on the balance of wanting to make work, and having very limited time? And then just the second one was off the back of a comment you made about viewing yourself as an asset, and whether that is a capitalist mindset, and how can we shift the language away from productivity being the main goal? So they're very different.
Yeah, I can certainly address that. I saw that question from Holly coming in, and you're right, it is the capitalist language, and I suppose part of the reason for it is to try and insert into the capitalist mindset a recognition of human flourishing and well-being. So it's more of a way of using the language against it, if you see what I mean, rather than like that's the ideal way to think of yourself. But I found it quite helpful, it rather than getting just drawn into this way of seeing everything as assets, to kind of use it back at myself and treat myself in that way, to see myself as an asset, as a business. But I agree, it's not really the ideal thing that we should be thinking of ourselves as some kind of thing on a balance sheet. So yes, I take that point. And then what was I'm trying to remember what the other one was.
Time management.
Oh yeah, time management. Yeah, he says forgetting what he was talking about. I don't believe in time management. I think time management is overrated for productivity, because not all units of time are equally productive. So I manage energy instead. It's harder if you've got particular things you need to do at particular times. So if your job involves doing things, on a timed basis, or being at things at certain points, of course you need to know how long things will take and all the rest of it. But in terms of like deep work, that creating things or working in a concentrated fashion, I tend to think of it as like the more you do of it, the more tired you get, and you can end up spending hours on something and making no progress. And actually I tend to think I can do one complicated thing each day, a couple of mid-level things, and the rest needs to be fairly easy in admin stuff. So if the really complicated thing is trying to learn enough about maths to be able to teach your kids, then you're not going to have enough brain left to do the other complicated things on your list. But it's about that budgeting I find more helpful than counting the minutes.
I think that's really key. And I think the other thing that made me think about is that we all just need to be a bit kinder to ourselves. So I talked earlier about kind of COVID-19 productivity levels, not discounting the fact that if you've got it, they're not, and you've been really poorly. But I just think things take, everything just takes up a lot of energy at the moment, a lot of energy, things take longer. And I think just giving yourself permission, that's the beauty of having these kinds of calls, is that other people can kind of say exactly that, they're going through things. And you go, great, it's not just me, certainly things are taking me longer, and I'm having to think very differently about energy levels. So I think that's a really good thing. Just to pick up on that first one, about the assets thing, I often ask people to think about good growth, not just growth per se. So when we started the hub, we grew really, really quickly. But within about 3 years, I was really miserable. I was really busy and I was really miserable because I wasn't doing what I wanted to be doing. I was running a company, having to bring in lots of contracts to pay all the staff that we needed because we were growing too fast. And all I did was talk to the bank manager and try and win contracts. Two of my least favourite things in the world, but on the outside, we were really smashing it. But I wasn't getting to do any of the work. I wasn't getting to hang out with artists. I wasn't doing any creating or any inventing. And so this idea of good growth and trying to identify where you want to be, what kind of life you want to have. Quite often what I will get people to do is to write themselves a postcard from the future. There's something about the process of it being a postcard and not a business plan that makes it much more personal. And so I think if you can hang on to that idea of good growth as well, what is good for you, what would good look like, that can be really useful. That's a really useful way of making sure you don't veer off the wrong path.
Yeah, we use a lot of these words that we think mean something and actually are just placeholders for not having figured it out yet, like good and happiness and well-being. It's we know it when we see it, but we're not sure how to get there. The word I use a lot is home. I think the process is not of trying to get to a fixed point. It's this idea of feeling at home, and that will be different for everyone. And so for some people, what home feels like is running a business because they hate doing the work, and for other people that's the worst bit of it because they want to be doing the interesting work bit. And so you can follow me home, but you won't feel at home because you'll be at my home, but you won't be at home. And so trying to figure out what that looks like for you is the key bit, and whatever that is fine. Yeah, that's right.
Interesting. Abby, are there any other questions or comments that would be useful to?
I don't think so. There's a lot of great chat, but I don't think there's any more questions unless anyone wants to put one now.
Okay, brilliant. Well, what I might do is just do a little bit of wrap up. I'm conscious that we're at 11:05. So I just wanted to say that we know that we've covered lots of stuff, and I know that the chat is really rich. So we're going to make sure that we share as much of this as possible with you. So everyone who signed up today, we will make sure that we send you a whole raft of follow-up resources. So we've been recording today. And that will go out on YouTube. We'll post that on YouTube as well, so that if you have found it useful and you think, I really wish so-and-so had joined us, or I really think so-and-so would find it useful, then you'll be able to share that with them as well. We'll make up a little manifesto of everything from the chat. And so that you've got everybody, each other's Mindapples, and who knows, that could be a kind of creative industries mass Mindapple. I don't know if you've ever had a kind of sector-wide Mindapple. It'd have to be a very big bit of cardboard, but we could do that. And also, we'll also signpost you to some places if you are having a tough time at the moment. You know, obviously we can't deal with everybody individually in a session like this. We will make sure that we signpost you to some places where you can get some proper help. And we'll do all of that in an email. We'll get everything out to you in an email on Friday. I wonder if, Sarah, could we ask you to pop back on if you can? I'd love to see what you've been doing with your illustration, if that's possible. And so we'll also be sharing Sarah's illustration with you.
Absolutely. I'm just going to try and I'll do the share screen now. I'm hoping it will work. Matt, you need to disable me. Oh, you have. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, it's not a video. I just need to go to share screen. Okay.
And this will be great if you're the kind of person that just finds looking at a visual much more exciting than, you know, listening to audio or just getting a load of stuff from chat.
It says host, sorry, Julia. It says host disabled participant screen sharing, and then when I'm going to screen share, it's just not letting me. So I'm not.
So I think Matt might need to enable screen sharing for you. So while he's doing that, what I'm going to ask is to tell you a little bit about the drop-in session that we're going to be doing. So this time next week, roughly, or 9:30 next Wednesday, we thought that we'd experiment with and do a little drop-in session. So this will be very different format to this one. It's just a chance for people to get together to talk about things that they're experiencing, what's going on for them, maybe pick up on some of the topics that came up today. Little experiment to see if that works. One of the things that I've been hearing a lot from people is that they're missing the chance to not just get together with people, but to get together around a particular topic. So we thought that we would offer a drop-in session. One of the reasons why I made the cake is because obviously I wanted to make Andy a little Mindapples cake, but the idea is that we might get everybody to turn up with a cup of tea, slice of cake, and we can just have a chat about things that are going on. Oh, I think Sarah's managed to share her screen. Ooh. There you go. So there's Sarah's graphic illustration. Loving the cake.
Some of that.
That's great, Sarah. You were doing a little bit of colouring in, I guess, maybe, and looks amazing.
I'll add to it. I'll make it a bit more interesting.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So Sarah's going to be sending that to me, and I'll share that with everybody so that you can catch up on that. Thanks, Sarah, for sharing that. That's great. So just back to the drop-in sessions, that'll be happening this time next week. If you would like to come along, we'll be sharing a link for you so that you can sign up to that one. And two other people are going to be joining me for that. One is Ella and the other one is another Andy. So if Ella and Andy could just turn their cameras back on and give us a little wave. So there's Ella and Andy. So Ella is a friend of mine who is very wise, and she has agreed to kind of co-host the session with me.
No pressure then.
No pressure, no pressure. Andy, another Andy, I seem to hang out with a lot of Andys these days. Andy is a trained mental health nurse, but he also runs a record label, which I think is a brilliant combination. So I was very pleased to meet Andy a few weeks ago. So Ella, Andy and I are going to be hosting that session next week. As I said, it's a chance for you to just turn up, have a chat, or maybe take some of the topics that we talked about today as a starting point. If 5 of us turn up, that's fine. If 25 of us turn up, we'll make some breakout rooms and we'll figure it out. But we just thought it might be nice to offer the chance for you to come back and share, maybe even share your Mindapples, tell us how those have been going. So that's next Wednesday, and we'll send you a link to that. Our next session, balance session, is on the 22nd of July. That'll be Andy Gibson and I again. And we're going to be talking about finding our way, how you can plan during periods of uncertainty. So we'll be looking at maybe picking up on some of the things around anxiety, I think, Andy, worry, what people can do around that.
Yeah, and I think to delve in a bit more into that kind of vigilance and trying to anticipate threats, but still trying to be productive and effective in what we're doing. So, also people are very welcome to send in what they think they'd like us to talk more about, because we can tailor it a bit. We're trying to anticipate what themes are coming out of these, but there's obviously a lot to cover. It'd be good to talk a bit about resilience and resilient planning, but also resilient mindsets and that kind of thing.
Brilliant, brilliant. So that's a good point. If you do have anything in particular you'd like us to cover, then probably the best way is either to email me. I think you've all got my email through the Eventbrite link, or you could just tweet me. I'm on Twitter as Curious Julia P, if you want to send any of those through. And obviously, if you want to share your Mindapples, that would be great as well. I think that might be about it for today. I feel like I need to do some thank yous. I should say a massive thank you to Andy for sharing all of your wisdom there. Thanks to Abby for looking after the chat. Thanks to Matt for keeping us going. And I think dealing with the jazz issue. It's not the first time I've used that sentence, dealing with the jazz issue, given my background. But also thank you to you for coming and for sharing and being so brilliant in sharing what you know, what you think. And also thank you again to our funders, South East Creatives and Colchester Borough Council. So before we all head off, what I would love you to do is pop your cameras back on and maybe go back into gallery view. And then you'll be able to see some of the other people that have been on the call with you. And I'm gonna try this. I don't know if it will work. I talked earlier on, I can't remember if it was in the main bit of the talk or when we were sort of doing the preamble before most people joined us. I was talking about one of the things that I've been doing on Zoom is making funny shapes with my hands when I've been on Zoom calls with children that I know. So I'm just wondering if we can all have a go in gallery view while we say goodbye to each other. You can also unmute yourselves if you want to. I don't know if that will unleash some kind of chaos. But if we could have a go at making a sort of apple, I've got no idea if this will work. How would you make an apple, a mind apple shape? Would it be kind of, it looks a bit like a heart or a, but I wondered if we could all have a go at that as we say a goodbye. I don't know how I'm going to wave and say goodbye at the same time as doing my apples. This is a terrible way to end it anyway, but thank you very much for joining and for doing funny shapes with your hands at the end. And hopefully we'll see some of you next week on the drop-in and others of you when we come back on the 22nd of July. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.